Would you please tell us your full name and the date you were born and where you were born?
My name is Iris Bean Beattie, and I was born in Sugar City, Idaho, at the home of my parents. I was born on May 1st, 1921.
Thank you. Can you repeat to us anything that happened surrounding your birth that might have been interesting to the hearer?
The day I was born, my mother said was the most beautiful day and quiet and sunshiny, and being May Day, she decided to name me Iris rather than the name she had chosen in the first place because it was a flower. I was the first brown-eyed bean born and dark complexioned, and this was very pleasing to my parents.
Thank you. Would you tell me how many children your parents had and where you place in those children?
My parents had 5 children, and I was the second child. I had one older sister and then 2 brothers, and then the youngest one was a girl also.
Thank you. Would you please tell me your father's full name and your mother's full name?
My father's full name was Harold Malvern Bean, and my mother's was Florence Jarman Kirby.
What did your father do as an occupation during the time when you were born?
I believe my father was worked on the dray for the company, delivering coal and things. He also did some farming.
Did he own his own farm, and what company that would be the coal company? Would you explain more fully?
I really don't remember these are just things that I have heard others say, but I think he just would haul coal to people and things that came in on the Union Pacific Railroad. At this time, he did not own a farm. It was just a little piece of land around our home.
What did he raise on this land, and did you have the regular farm animals and so forth?
When I was a child, I can remember that we always had chickens and pigs and cattle and horses. Every fall, there was a time when we were all excited about it because the pigs were killed, and it was very interesting to watch this procedure, and we always had our own beef and of course the milk and eggs and things, and we raised chickens to eat.
Do you know approximately how much land was surrounding your home in Sugar City at this time?
I believe there was probably only an acre or two at this time, but Dad increased it later to 8 acres, and he grew beets and potatoes and hay.
Would you now please tell us what your mother did and what her main services at home were?
My mother was very much a mother and housewife all the time. She was a very good cook and a seamstress, and she was known for her beautiful ironing. She was always in the home, and she never did learn to drive. Therefore, if she went away, she usually just would go visiting to one of her friends for an hour or 2.
Did she have any particular things she liked to do, or did she tell you anything regarding the births of her children? Were they difficult for her, or did she have any problems or difficulties that were serious to her health at this time as far as bearing children?
My mother was always in kind of poor health. At least she had a lot of things go wrong. She had at least 1 miscarriage, and my oldest brother Hal was born at home also, and he weighed 10 pounds, and he was wedged up around her rib cage, and the doctor came to the home and stayed for nearly 24 hours working with her, and at that time it was very dangerous, but she did come through it, and the baby was another little dark complexioned healthy baby. Very difficult birth though.
Was she always attended, as far as you know, by doctors and not midwives, or did she deliver any of them on her own?
She always had a doctor. Some of the children were born at home, but she never had a midwife, really. It was a doctor that would come. But I can remember the birth of my sister, who was 12 years younger than I am, and that's the only one I can remember. And she went to the hospital in St. Anthony when she had her.
Could you give us some description or size of the home that you were living in when you were born?
I believe at that time the home was only 3 rooms. Dad had borrowed the money to build this home, and he was very conscientious. He would never go into debt for anything else after he once paid off that mortgage. And I was just a young child when they finally put in a bathroom and built 2 extra rooms on the house.
Thank you. Now we'd like to go into some of your early childhood memories. If you can go back just as far as you can remember some of the things you used to do and were expected of you, and approximately the age, if you would please.
I can only remember that from a very early time we were taught to be industrious. I mean, we were never allowed to just lie around or waste time. Though after we would do our chores or the work that was required of us, we could have so long to play, but we were never just on our own to do whatever we wanted. My brother Hal, who was 3 years younger than I, always herded cows with me. And I do not remember the time, but I just knew that this was early in my life, and we used to take the cows out on the right-of-way, and we'd stay all day long, and we'd bring them home about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. When the freight train went through Sugar City at about 10 in the morning, one of us would run home, and my mom would have some kind of a little lunch for us, and we'd come back and had a little picnic, and this helped the day to go. We used to play on the railroad ties that were stacked along the tracks, and we'd play hide and seek and all sorts of games. We were very afraid of the section men because they went through to repair the tracks, and somewhere we got the idea that they were probably mean men, so when we'd see the section car come, we'd run and hide behind the school building or something, which was on the other side of the tracks, but close by. We also, from an early date, worked in the fields because my father always had just enough land there to raise a few beets, and we always thinned the beets and hoed the potatoes all summer long because we did have a lot of morning glory on the farm. And I can remember getting up very early and going out and working in the field, and then when it'd be about 10 and start getting cold, why, we'd come back in the house and do what we wanted to do or play at that, and then we'd go back out later in the afternoon around 4, and we'd work until evening. Dad always came home from work and would come out and help us, and so we always had a really close relationship. And the folks grew a garden, and we were expected to help keep the weeds out of the garden. So basically I'd say I worked in the field and herded cows. My folks sold milk, and we also delivered milk for years. And in the wintertime my folks would bundle me up real warm, and I'd have to walk up, it'd be 4 or 5 blocks up through this town and deliver milk, and then I'd leave the milk bottles at the hardware and go on down to school. And sometimes I'd wear overalls or something over my clothes, and they'd tie them down with twine so that my legs wouldn't get wet. And then when I'd get to school, I'd take these things off, and I'd have my school clothes on.
Speaking of education, I'd like to ask you now if you could tell us something about the educational background of your parents.
Neither my mother nor my father graduated from high school. I believe my mother only completed the 8th grade. My father, I believe, went a little longer than that, but I remember that he did play on the ball team, and they used to call him Dutch. That was his nickname. And he was evidently a really good player. He played with Emery Thomas and some of them that I knew later on in my life as I grew up. My mother had a little sister, Minnie, and she became very ill, and my mother had to stay home and help tend her, and she died when she was only 9 months old, but my mother was never able to go back to school. It seemed like they always needed her. But she really was eager to learn, and she studied all her life. And I remember when my cousin was in high school, my mother wrote a theme for her one time about General MacArthur, and she received an A on it. She was very much an avid reader, and definitely for historical reading. She enjoyed that very much.
You have, going back now to the time on the farm and the work that you had to do, would you tell us of some of your early playmates you had, and also if your sister Phyllis, your older sister, was out on the farm, or your younger brothers and sisters, or just who your companions were?
My oldest sister Phyllis, when she was in the first grade, she had pneumonia 2 or 3 times and missed a lot of school, and therefore she repeated the first grade. She also, they discovered that she had some heart problem, and so in those days, of course, this seemed to be quite serious, and so she was never really out in the field day after day. She used to help my mother a lot. As she got older, she worked in the fall picking potatoes. My closest tie with my brothers and sisters, I believe, was with my brother Hal, because we spent most of the time together working in the field and even played together a lot in the summertime. I can remember that I was kind of known as a tomboy because we used to love to climb, and we climbed every tree and every building that we could, and we liked to rob the birds' nests. And my mom said I was hanging from my knees on the branches of the trees more often than I was standing on my feet.
Black panties.
She made me a pair of black underpanties that had elastic in the legs and buttoned on a little panty waist, because she said I was just always climbing and hanging, and we didn't used to wear Levi's and pants like the kids do nowadays, so she just protected my modesty by making these black panties to climb around in. There were no girls my age on my block, and of course we didn't used to go very far away from home to play, but there was a boy by the name of Billy Marler, and he became a close friend along with my brother, and I remember riding the horses with him, and when I got a little older, we used to ride on very primitive looking skis, and we'd build these big ski jumps, and the horse would pull us over the ski jumps, and I'd ride on the skis behind these bigger fellows, and I had a lot of fun. I was definitely an outdoors person, and during the winter time on Saturdays we'd do our work, and then we'd go out and play all day long, and of course we had very deep snow every winter, and the winds would blow and cake the snow, and so we'd take our sleigh out and go over the hills, because it'd even drift up over the fences. We'd go in for lunch and that, and then away we'd go, and we just loved this kind of activity.
We'd like to pursue a little bit about your friendships and how important this was in your life, and who were your greatest friends, and some of the incidents you had with them, if you would please, and when they began.
The earliest friendship I remember developing was with Verla Hendricks. She lived just 2 blocks from me, and she was the only child in the family, and so she had to have friends too, and I've just always been this type of person, so we started a friendship by the time we were in the first grade, maybe a little before, and she continued to be my friend up until she died at the age of 60. After I started school and that, I developed a group of, we were just known as a crowd of girls that always went clear through school together and graduated from high school, and they were Faye Waldrum and Faye Holman, Frances and Doris Hamilton, and then there was a girl by the name of Helen Hanai and Verla Barman. In fact, in our crowd we had 3 Verlas, 3 Fays, and 3 Helens, and then we had a Doris and Frances and Iris, and the 12 of us were very close friends all the time.
We'd like to continue further with your friends, especially Verla, if you would now go into more detail.
Well, Verla and I were living close together, and she being the only one in the family, it made it so that we became very close. And when we were 11 or 12, I can remember getting a doll that we loved so far, but I didn't ever use the sewing machine at home, but her mother let her use her sewing machine, and so we would make doll clothes together, and we had the best time. All through school, she remained my friend, and then when we were in the 7th grade, another close friend was Helen Wadsworth, who moved to Sugar City at that time with her family. Her father was chief chemist of the sugar factory, and he used to test the sugar for the purity and that, and so he'd make this, what we call sugar candy. It was just clear candy like they make all-day suckers out of, and he'd put them on a plate or something and put lifesavers on for eyes and decorate them, and when we'd go up to see him, why, he always had some of this candy for us. The sugar factory is, of course, where Sugar City got the name, because it was a very important part of the life there, and many of the people worked there. And when I'd go up with Helen to see her dad and go to the office, we'd go see those big spinners and that of the sugar, and it was always a frightening experience, but definitely exciting. Another time, lots of times I'd go up with a friend of mine or an acquaintance. She was older than I was, but she lived on our block, and she used to have to take a lunch up to her brothers who worked at the sugar factory. And once in a while my mother would let me go with her, and this was always such an kind of an exciting anticipation for me, because we would go back through where the syrup would be poured out over the building there, and this big brown syrup would come down, and so I would think that I had to be very careful or I might get into some dangerous situation. I see now it wasn't all that far away from home, but it was sure exciting for a child. And of course it was the backbone of Sugar City, along with the farming. Helen became a close friend too all the way through school, and we even graduated from Rick's College, and she married Milton Rummel from Sugar City, and they have just finished a term as temple presidents in Idaho Falls. She was my escort to the temple when I was married in the Salt Lake Temple.